Long before humans understood the mechanics of planetary motion or the true nature of stars, they gazed upward and found patterns in the night sky that seemed to speak directly to their lives. In the fertile river valleys of ancient Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers carved paths through dusty plains, the first astrologers were not mystics or fortune tellers, but priests who served as intermediaries between heaven and earth. These early observers noticed that certain celestial events coincided with earthly changes, and from these observations grew a system of belief that would spread across continents and persist for millennia. The story begins around 3,000 years before the Common Era. In the temple complexes of Sumerian cities like your Uruk and Eridu, here priests climbed ziggurat towers each night to observe the movements of celestial bodies, recording their positions on clay tablets in cuneiform script. They watched the moon wax and waned through its monthly cycle, tracked the wandering paths of planets against a stellar background, and noted when certain stars appeared just before dawn to herald the changing seasons. These observations were not merely academic exercises, but served practical purposes for agricultural planning and religious ritual timing. The Sumerians identified the planets visible to the naked eye and associated each with their pantheon of gods. So the bright planet we call Venus became Inanna, goddess of love and war. Its appearances in morning and evening sky reflected her dual nature. The red planet Mars embodied Nergal, god of plague and conflict, while Jupiter represented Marduk, the king of gods, whose steady path through the heavens demonstrated divine order. Saturn, moving slowest of all visible planets, became associated with Ninurta, god of agriculture and time. Mercury, darting quickly near the sun, was linked to Nabu, the swift messenger and god of writing. As Sumerian civilization gave way to Babylonian dominance around 2,000 years before the Common Era, astronomical observation became increasingly sophisticated. Babylonian astronomer priests developed mathematical methods to predict lunar eclipses and planetary positions, creating ephemeris tables that could forecast celestial events years in advance. They divided the sky into 3 paths, or ways, each associated with a different god, and tracked which constellations rose in each path throughout the year. This systematic approach to celestial observation laid the groundwork for what would eventually become the zodiac. The concept of celestial omens emerged from these careful observations. Babylonian priests noticed that unusual astronomical events often preceded significant earthly occurrences, though their understanding of correlation versus causation differed from modern scientific thinking. A lunar eclipse might foretell the death of a king, while a particular planetary conjunction could signal impending war or famine. These interpretations were collected in vast omen series, the most famous being the Enuma Anu Inla, compilation of over 7,000 celestial omens recorded on 70 tablets. This omen literature reveals how early astrologers viewed the relationship between heaven and earth. They believed the gods communicated their intentions through celestial signs, writing messages in the sky for those who knew how to read them. A halo around the moon might indicate coming rainfall, while the appearance of a comet could herald dynastic change. These interpretations were not arbitrary, but followed established precedents recorded over generations, creating a systematic body of knowledge passed down through scribal schools. Around the 8th century, before the Common Era, Babylonian astronomers made a revolutionary innovation that would forever change astrology. They divided the ecliptic, the apparent path of the sun through the sky, into 12 equal segments of 30 degrees each. Each segment was associated with a constellation through which the sun, moon, and planets appeared to travel. This was the birth of the zodiac as we know it. Though the Babylonian constellation figures differed somewhat from those later adopted by the Greeks, the Babylonian zodiac included familiar figures like the bull, the lion, and the scorpion, but also featured constellations unknown to modern astrology. The hired man would become Aries, while the star cluster evolved into the Pleiades, before being replaced by Taurus. The true shepherd of Anu transformed into Orion, though it would later be excluded from the zodiacal 12. This process of standardization took centuries, as astronomers refined their observations and adjusted constellation boundaries to create a more regular system. Royal astrology dominated this early period, as celestial divination primarily served kings and the state. Court astrologers advised rulers on matters of war and peace, the timing of coronations and religious ceremonies, and the interpretation of unusual celestial events. When something extraordinary appeared in the sky, such as a bright comet or an unexpected eclipse, the king would consult his astrologers to understand what the gods intended. Sometimes these interpretations led to dramatic actions, such as the temporary installation of substitute kings during particularly inauspicious periods, allowing the real monarch to avoid predicted disasters. The practice of creating birth charts for individuals, what we now call natal astrology, had not yet developed in early Mesopotamia. Instead, astrology focused on mundane predictions affecting entire kingdoms and peoples. The position of planets at the new year might determine whether the coming months would bring abundant harvests or destroying floods. A conjunction of Mars and Saturn could warn of approaching armies, while Venus appearing as morning star after a period as evening star might signal a change in political fortune. Mesopotamian astrologers also developed the concept of planetary periods and cycles that would profoundly influence later astrological tradition. They discovered that planets return to similar positions relative to the stars after specific intervals, such as the 8-year cycle of Venus or the 12-year cycle of Jupiter. These periodic returns suggested a cosmic rhythm underlying earthly events, a celestial clockwork that could be decoded to understand past, present, and future. The spread of Mesopotamian astrological knowledge began through trade networks and diplomatic exchanges. Merchants carrying cuneiform tablets along with their goods introduced celestial divination to distant lands. By the first millennium before the Common Era, Babylonian astrology had reached Egypt, where it merged with indigenous stellar traditions. The Egyptians had long observed stars to regulate their calendar and align their pyramids, but they had not developed the systematic omen interpretation found in Mesopotamia. Egyptian priests adapted Babylonian zodiacal concepts to their own religious framework, associating zodiac signs with Egyptian deities. The constellation Leo became connected with Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess, while Virgo was linked to Isis, holding wheat sheaves. This syncretism created new astrological traditions that would later influence Hellenistic astrology. The Egyptians also contributed their own innovations, particularly in the division of the night sky into 36 decans, 10-degree segments, each ruled by a specific star or star group. The Persian conquest of Babylon in the 6th century before the Common Era marked another crucial phase in astrology's development. The Achaemenid Empire, stretching from India to Greece, became a conduit for astrological knowledge to spread both east and west. Persian Magi, the priestly class of Zoroastrianism, incorporated Babylonian celestial divination into their own practices, though they reinterpreted it through their dualistic worldview of cosmic struggle between light and darkness. Under Persian rule, Babylonian astronomers continued their work, achieving even greater precision in planetary calculations. They developed sophisticated mathematical models using arithmetic progressions to predict planetary positions without requiring constant observation. This mathematical astronomy, distinct from but intertwined with astrological interpretation, represented one of the ancient world's greatest scientific achievements. The accuracy of their predictions impressed Greek visitors who would later carry this knowledge westward. The last centuries of Mesopotamian independence saw the creation of the first known personal horoscopes, dating from the 5th century before the Common Era. These cuneiform tablets record planetary positions at the time of birth for specific individuals. though they contain only basic information compared to later Greek horoscopes. This shift from exclusively mundane to personal astrology marked a democratization of celestial divination. It remained primarily available to the wealthy and powerful, as the ancient Near East came under Hellenistic influence. Following Alexander the Great's conquests, Babylonian astrology encountered Greek philosophical thought. This meeting would transform astrology from a collection of omens and observations into a complex theoretical system, attempting to explain the mechanics of celestial influence. Greek thinkers would ask not just what the stars predicted, but why and how they could affect earthly events, questions that would occupy astrologers for centuries to come. The legacy of Mesopotamian astrology extends far beyond its original context. The zodiac signs we recognize today, the planetary associations that inform modern astrological interpretation, and the fundamental belief that celestial bodies influence terrestrial affairs all originated in these ancient river valleys. Even our 7-day week derives from Babylonian planetary gods, each day ruled by a different celestial body, though transformed through millennia of cultural exchange and reinterpretation. Essential framework established by Mesopotamian astronomer priests continues to underlie contemporary astrological practice. It's testament to the enduring human desire to find meaning in the stars above. The meeting of East and West in the wake of Alexander's conquests created an intellectual ferment that would transform astrology from a collection of celestial omens into a sophisticated philosophical system. Greek thinkers, encountering Babylonian astronomical precision and Egyptian mystical traditions, began asking fundamental questions about the nature of celestial influence, rather than simply accepting that planets affected human affairs. They sought to understand the mechanisms behind these influences, applying their philosophical frameworks to create what would become known as Hellenistic astrology. In Alexandria, that great melting pot of ancient wisdom, founded by Alexander in 331 BCE, scholars from diverse traditions gathered in the museum and library to exchange knowledge. Here, Babylonian astronomical tables met Greek geometry, Egyptian Deccan traditions encountered Stoic philosophy, and from this synthesis emerged a new form of astrology that was both more personal, and more theoretical than anything that had come before. The city became the intellectual capital of the Mediterranean world, and its scholars would codify astrological practice for centuries to come. The philosophical foundation for Greek astrology drew heavily from Stoic concepts of cosmic sympathy, the idea that all parts of the universe were interconnected through invisible bonds of influence. The Stoics believed in a living cosmos where the macrocosm of the heavens reflected and influenced the microcosm of human life. This provided a rational framework for understanding how distant planets could affect earthly events, not through direct mechanical action, but through a web of correspondences linking all levels of existence. Pythagorean number mysticism also contributed essential elements to emerging Hellenistic astrology. The Pythagoreans had long taught that numbers and geometric relationships governed cosmic harmony, and astrologers incorporated these ideas into their calculations of planetary aspects. The opposition of planets 180 degrees apart, the harmonious trine at 120 degrees, the challenging square at 90 degrees. These angular relationships were understood as creating different qualities of planetary interaction, like notes in a cosmic symphony that could be harmonious or discordant. The development of the four elements theory by Empedocles and its elaboration by Aristotle provided another crucial component. Fire, earth, air, and water became fundamental to astrological interpretation, with each zodiac sign assigned an element that determined its basic nature. Fire signs burned with passion and initiative. Earth signs embodied stability and materiality. Air signs carried thought and communication, while water signs flowed with emotion and intuition. These elemental associations added layers of meaning to planetary positions, creating a rich symbolic language for interpreting celestial configurations. Around the 2nd century BCE, a revolutionary innovation appeared that would define Western astrology thereafter. The horoscope, from the Greek words hora meaning hour and skopos meaning observer, marked the exact positions of all celestial bodies at a specific moment, usually birth, creating a cosmic snapshot that could reveal an individual's destiny. This was far more sophisticated than earlier Babylonian birth charts, incorporating not just planetary positions, but also the ascendant, the zodiac sign rising on the eastern horizon at the moment of birth, which became the starting point for dividing the sky into 12 houses. The house system represented one of Hellenistic astrology's most brilliant innovations. By dividing the sky into 12 segments based on the daily rotation of Earth, astrologers created a framework for understanding how celestial influences manifested in different areas of life. The first house governed personality and physical appearance. The second house ruled possessions and resources. The seventh house concerned partnerships and marriage, while the 10th house indicated career and public standing. This system allowed astrologers to make specific predictions about various life domains based on which planets occupied which houses. The concept of planetary rulership evolved during this period, with each zodiac sign assigned a ruling planet that governed its affairs. The sun ruled Leo, expressing solar qualities of leadership and vitality through the lion sign. The moon governed Cancer, channeling lunar themes of emotion and nurturing through the crab's protective shell. Mercury ruled both Gemini and Virgo, bringing communication and analysis to these signs. This system of rulerships created additional layers of interpretation, as planets gained strength or weakness depending on their zodiacal placement. Berosus, a Babylonian priest who wrote in Greek around 280 BCE, played a crucial role in transmitting Mesopotamian astrological knowledge to the Hellenistic world. His histories of Babylon included extensive discussions of celestial divination, introducing Greek readers to centuries of Babylonian observations. Though his original works are lost, later authors preserved fragments that show how he bridged Eastern and Western traditions, translating not just language, but entire conceptual frameworks. The emergence of astrological schools in the Hellenistic Curia reflected astrology's growing sophistication and popularity. Different teachers developed their own methods and interpretations, leading to various competing systems. Some emphasized the importance of the ascendant and house placements, while others focused on planetary aspects and configurations. These schools were not merely theoretical, but included practical training in casting horoscopes, interpreting charts, and advising clients on everything from business ventures to marriage prospects. Personal astrology flourished as never before during the Hellenistic period, extending beyond royalty to merchants, soldiers, and even slaves who could afford a consultation. Astrologers set up shops in marketplaces, offering horoscopes for a few coins. Papyrus fragments from Greco-Roman Egypt preserve hundreds of these personal horoscopes, revealing how ordinary people sought celestial guidance for daily concerns. Parents commissioned birth charts for newborns. Lovers compared horoscopes for compatibility. And merchants consulted astrologers before embarking on trading voyages. The technical literature of Hellenistic astrology reached remarkable sophistication. Texts like the anthologies of Vettius Valens, written in the 2nd century CE, provided detailed instructions for calculating planetary positions, interpreting aspects, and predicting life events through various timing techniques. These works combined mathematical precision with interpretive nuance, creating a comprehensive system that could address virtually any question a client might pose. The doctrine of planetary sects divided planets into diurnal and nocturnal teams, adding another interpretive dimension. The Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn formed the day sect, functioning best in charts of people born during daylight hours. The Moon, Venus, and Mars comprised the night sect, gaining strength in nocturnal nativities. Mercury could join either sect, depending on whether it rose before or after the Sun. This concept reflected the Greek tendency to see cosmic forces in terms of complementary opposites, like the interplay of light and darkness. Hellenistic astrologers developed sophisticated timing techniques to predict when natal potential would manifest in actual events. The system of perfections advanced the chart by one sign per year, activating different life themes in sequence. Zodiacal releasing, attributed to the 2nd century BCE astrologer Abraham, used planetary periods to identify peak periods of activity and achievement. These techniques transformed astrology from simple character analysis into a dynamic system for understanding life's unfolding through time. The concept of fate versus free will became a central philosophical issue in Hellenistic astrology. While some astrologers promoted strict determinism, arguing that the stars decreed an inescapable destiny, others developed more nuanced positions. They distinguished between what was fated and what remained open to human choice, suggesting that while certain broad life patterns might be predetermined, individuals retained agency in how they responded to celestial influences. This debate would continue throughout astrology's history, reflecting broader philosophical questions about determinism and human freedom. Medical astrology flourished in the Hellenistic period as physicians incorporated celestial considerations into their practice. Each zodiac sign was associated with specific body parts, from Aries ruling the head to Pisces governing the feet. Planetary positions at the onset of illness could indicate the disease's course and appropriate treatments. The moon's phases were considered crucial for timing medical procedures, with surgery avoided when the moon occupied the zodiac sign ruling the affected body part. This medical astrology was not considered alternative medicine, but mainstream medical practice. It's taught in the schools of Alexandria and other centers of learning. Spread of Hellenistic astrology followed trade routes and military conquests throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. Roman merchants brought it to Gaul and Britain, while Eastern traders carried it along the Silk Road to Central Asia and eventually China. In each new cultural context, local traditions merged with Hellenistic techniques, creating regional variations while maintaining core principles. This diffusion ensured astrology's survival, even as political powers rose and fell. Claudius Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos, written in Alexandria around 150 CE, represented the culmination of Hellenistic astrological thought. Ptolemy, better known for his astronomical work, the Almagest, attempted to place astrology on a scientific foundation by explaining celestial influences through natural philosophy, rather than divine intervention. He argued that planets affected Earth through physical emanations, similar to how the sun provided light and heat. His systematic approach and prestigious reputation ensured that Tetrabiblos would become the most influential astrological text in Western tradition. The Hermetic texts, attributed to the legendary Hermes Trismegistus, added an esoteric dimension to Hellenistic astrology. These writings, promptly composed in Alexandria between the 1st and 3rd centuries CE, presented astrology as a sacred science, revealing divine wisdom encoded in celestial patterns. The Hermetic tradition emphasized the spiritual significance of astrological knowledge, viewing it not merely as a predictive tool, but as a path to understanding humanity's place in the cosmic order. By the end of the Hellenistic period, astrology had transformed from its Mesopotamian origins into something far more complex and philosophically sophisticated. The Greek contribution was not primarily in astronomical observation, where they largely relied on Babylonian data, but in creating theoretical frameworks that explained and systematized celestial influence. Thorne transformed astrology from a collection of omens into a comprehensive system addressing personality, destiny, timing, and the fundamental relationship between cosmos and individual, establishing principles that would endure through the rise and fall of empires to come. As the Roman Empire reached its greatest extent in the 2nd century CE, astrology had become woven into the fabric of imperial life. From the palace to the poorest quarters of Rome, the purple-clad emperors who ruled the known world consulted their court astrologers before battles and building projects, while common citizens clutched amulets inscribed with their birth stars and visited street corner fortune tellers who promised to reveal their futures for a handful of copper coins. This was the golden age of Roman astrology, when celestial divination enjoyed imperial patronage and popular enthusiasm in equal measure. The Emperor Septimius Severus, who ruled from 193 to 211 CE, exemplified the Roman elite's embrace of astrology. He reportedly chose his second wife, Julia Domna, after learning her horoscope predicted she would marry a king. The ceiling of his palace featured his natal chart painted in brilliant colors, displaying to all visitors the celestial configuration that had destined him for greatness. His commitment to astrology was so complete that he had horoscopes cast for potential rivals, using celestial divination as a tool of political intelligence. Julia Domna herself became a patron of astrological learning, gathering scholars and astrologers at her court in a circle that preserved and transmitted Hellenistic astrological knowledge. Her Syrian origins brought Eastern mystical traditions into contact with Greco-Roman astrology, contributing to the increasingly syncretic nature of celestial divination in the empire. Under her patronage, astrologers translated Greek texts into Latin, making astrological knowledge accessible to educated Romans who lacked Greek learning. The Roman approach to astrology differed subtly from its Hellenistic predecessors in its emphasis on power and practical application, where Greek philosophers had debated the theoretical basis of celestial influence. Roman astrologers focused on concrete predictions about political succession, military victory, and economic prosperity. The Roman genius for organization extended to astrology, with professional astrologers forming collegia, guild-like associations that regulated practice and training. Ramachus Maternus, writing his Methesis around 334 CE, created the most comprehensive Latin astrological textbook of antiquity. A Roman senator who converted to Christianity later in life, Firmicus presented astrology as a divine science revealed by the gods to benefit humanity. This 8-book treatise covered every aspect of astrological practice, from basic principles to advanced predictive techniques, preserving Hellenistic methods while adapting them to Roman sensibilities. The Methesis will remain a primary source for medieval astrologers 1,000 years later. The proliferation of astrology among all social classes in Rome created a thriving marketplace for celestial services. Professional astrologers ranged from learned mathematicians who served the elite to humble street practitioners who offered simplified horoscopes to laborers and slaves. Its astrological symbols appeared everywhere in Roman daily life, from mosaic floors depicting the zodiac to coins bearing emperors' birth signs. Even gladiators wore amulets with planetary symbols, believing celestial forces could influence their survival in the arena. Roman innovations in astrological practice included the development of electional astrology, choosing optimal times for important undertakings. Roman generals consulted astrologers to determine auspicious moments for beginning campaigns, while merchants sought favorable planetary configurations for launching business ventures. This timing of activities, according to celestial conditions, integrated astrology into the practical decision-making of Roman life, making it not just a system of prediction, but a tool for strategic planning. The mystery religions that flourished in the Roman Empire often incorporated astrological elements into their teachings and initiations. The cult of Mithras, popular among soldiers, featured zodiacal symbolism prominently in its underground temples. Initiates progressed through 7 grades corresponding to the 7 planets, sending a celestial ladder towards spiritual enlightenment. These mystery traditions presented astrology not merely as divination, but as a map of the soul's journey through cosmic realms. Yet, even at its height, Roman astrology faced persistent criticism and occasional persecution. Skeptics like Sextus Empiricus argued that astrology's predictions were too vague to be meaningful, and that astrologers disagreed among themselves about fundamental principles. More seriously, emperors periodically expelled astrologers from Rome when political predictions threatened imperial stability. The Emperor Tiberius, himself a devoted student of astrology, banned private consultations about imperial horoscopes, making it treasonous to calculate when the emperor might die. The rise of Christianity presented astrology with its greatest challenge yet. Early Christians found themselves in a complex relationship with celestial divination, simultaneously attracted to its explanatory power and troubled by its pagan associations and implications for free will. Some early Christians saw the Star of Bethlehem as a divine endorsement of astrology, arguing that God used celestial signs to announce Christ's birth. Others worried that attributing power to stars and planets diminished God's sovereignty and human moral responsibility. Origen, the 3rd century Christian theologian, articulated a nuanced position that would influence Christian thought for centuries. He accepted that stars might indicate future events as signs from God, but denied they caused those events. This distinction between stars as signs versus stars as causes allowed some Christians to retain interest in astrology while rejecting its deterministic implications. Stars became a divine language that could be read, but not a force that compelled human action. The Emperor Constantine's conversion to Christianity in the early 4th century marked a turning point for astrology's status in the empire. While Constantine himself continued to use astrological symbolism on coins and monuments, suggesting personal belief in celestial influences, official Christian doctrine increasingly opposed astrological practice. Church councils began condemning astrology as incompatible with Christian faith, though these pronouncements suggest the practice remained widespread among converts. Augustine of Hippo's rejection of astrology proved particularly influential for Western Christianity. In his youth, Augustine had been an enthusiastic student of astrology, casting horoscopes and believing firmly in celestial determination. His Confessions, written around 400 CE, describes his gradual disillusionment with astrology, particularly troubled by the problem of twins who shared the same horoscope but experienced different fates. Augustine's authoritative condemnation would shape official Christian attitudes toward astrology for the next millennium. The theological arguments against astrology in this period centered on several key issues. The problem of determinism seemed to eliminate moral responsibility, making sin inevitable rather than chosen. Second, attributing power to celestial bodies appeared to compromise divine omnipotence, suggesting limits to God's sovereignty. Third, the pagan origins of astrological practice, with planets named after Roman gods, made it seem inherently idolatrous. These objections would echo through centuries of Christian thought. Despite official condemnation, astrology persisted in Christianized Rome through various adaptations and accommodations. Some Christian astrologers replaced pagan planetary deities with angels, arguing that celestial influences operated through divine intermediaries rather than pagan gods. Others developed a Christianized natural astrology that accepted celestial influence on weather, agriculture, and medicine, while rejecting judicial astrology's claims about human fate. This distinction between natural and judicial astrology would become important in medieval thought. The preservation of astrological knowledge during this transitional period depended heavily on a few dedicated scholars who continued copying and translating texts despite religious opposition. Kate, in Constantinople, the eastern capital of the Roman Empire, Greek astrological manuscripts were preserved in imperial and monastic libraries. Priests and scribes, even while copying condemnations of astrology, also preserved the technical treatises that would allow its later revival. The figure of Julius Firmicus Maternus embodies the complex relationship between Christianity and astrology in late antiquity. After writing his comprehensive astrological textbook, he converted to Christianity and authored fierce attacks on pagan religion. Yet he never explicitly renounced astrology, and his thesis continued to be copied and studied. This ambivalence reflects broader tensions in late Roman society, where Christian faith and astrological practice often coexisted uneasily in individual lives. The barbarian invasions that contributed to the Western Roman Empire's fall in the 5th century disrupted the institutional structures supporting astrological learning. Schools closed, libraries burned, and the networks of professional astrologers dissolved. Yet astrology's basic concepts had become so deeply embedded in popular culture that they survived even this catastrophe. Farmers continued planting by the moon, Physicians still considered planetary hours when gathering medicinal herbs, and ordinary people remembered their birth signs even as they forgot the complex calculations behind horoscopic astrology. In the Eastern Roman Empire, which would become known as Byzantium, astrology maintained a stronger institutional presence. Byzantine emperors continued consulting court astrologers, though often secretly, to avoid ecclesiastical censure. The famous 6th century historian Copius records that the Emperor Justinian's court included several prominent astrologers who influenced imperial policy. This Byzantine preservation of astrological knowledge would prove crucial for its later transmission to the Islamic world. The compilation of astrological anthologies in late antiquity ensured the survival of earlier knowledge through the coming Dark Ages. Works like the Anthology of Vedius Valens and the Apodolismatics of Hephaesto of Thebes gathered techniques from multiple sources, creating comprehensive handbooks that preserved methods whose original sources would be lost. These anthologies functioned like time capsules, carrying Hellenistic and Roman astrological knowledge forward to future revivals. The period between 200 and 500 CE witnessed both astrology's greatest triumph and its most serious challenge. It achieved unprecedented popularity and sophistication in the Roman Empire, while simultaneously facing theological opposition that would officially marginalize it in Christian Europe. Yet, astrology's adaptability, its deep roots in popular culture, and the dedication of scholars who preserved its texts ensured its survival through the transformation of the ancient world. As the classical age ended and the medieval period began, astrology retreated from public prominence but never disappeared, waiting in monastery libraries and Byzantine courts for its next renaissance. The 7th century brought warriors from the Arabian desert who would transform the intellectual landscape of the known world as Islamic armies conquered vast territories from Spain to India. They encountered the accumulated wisdom of Greek, Persian, Indian, and Mesopotamian civilizations. Rather than destroying this knowledge, Muslim scholars embarked on one of history's greatest translation movements, preserving and enhancing astrological learning that might otherwise have vanished forever. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad became the beacon of this intellectual revolution, where astrology was not merely preserved but revolutionized through mathematical innovation and philosophical sophistication. The Sassanid Persian Empire, which fell to Arab conquest in 651 CE, had maintained strong astrological traditions that immediately influenced Islamic thought. Persian astrologers had preserved both Hellenistic techniques and indigenous Zoroastrian celestial doctrines, creating a unique synthesis that emphasized the cosmic battle between light and darkness. The Sassanid court astrologers had developed sophisticated predictive techniques, including the Fardarias, planetary periods that divided human life into unequal segments ruled by different planets. These Persian methods would profoundly shape Islamic astrology. The Abbasid Caliph al-Mansur, who founded Baghdad in 762 CE, chose the city's location and timing based on astrological calculations performed by his court astrologer. Nawbakht, a Persian convert to Islam, the horoscope cast for Baghdad's foundation, promised the city would endure for centuries as a center of learning and power. Its official endorsement of astrology at the highest levels of Islamic authority set a precedent that would enable celestial sciences to flourish throughout the Muslim world. Mashallah ibn Athari, a Jewish astrologer from Basra, became one of the most influential figures in early Islamic astrology, working in the late 8th century. He translated Persian and Greek astrological texts into Arabic while developing his own innovations. His work on horary astrology, answering specific questions through charts cast for the moment of inquiry, established techniques still used today. Mustela's writings bridged different astrological traditions, creating a synthesis that would define Islamic astrology's distinctive character. The translation movement reached its peak under Caliph Harun al-Rashid and his successor al-Ma'mun in the early 9th century. The Beit al-Hikmah, or House of Wisdom, employed teams of translators who rendered Greek, Persian, Sanskrit, and Syriac texts into Arabic. Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos, Dorotheus's Carmen Astrologicum, and Vettius Valence's Anthology were among the crucial astrological works preserved through Arabic translation. Without this massive scholarly effort, much of Hellenistic astrology would have been permanently lost. Abu Mashar, known in the Latin West as Albumassar, Spurge as the most influential Islamic astrologer of the 9th century. His great introduction to astrology synthesized Aristotelian natural philosophy with astrological theory, providing rational explanations for celestial influence that would later prove acceptable to Christian scholars. Abu Mashar argued that planetary influences operated through natural physical processes, transmitting qualities of heat, cold, moisture, and dryness that affected terrestrial matter. This naturalistic interpretation made astrology compatible with both Islamic and Christian theology. The development of Arabic parts, also called Arabian points or lots, represented a unique Islamic contribution to astrological technique. While Hellenistic astrology had known a few lots, most notably the part of fortune, Islamic astrologers developed hundreds of these calculated points. Each part was derived from the positions of 2 planets in the ascendant, creating sensitive points in the horoscope that revealed specific information about wealth, marriage, children, death, and countless other topics. The part of spirit, part of love, and part of sickness became standard features in medieval astrological practice. Islamic mathematicians revolutionized astronomical calculation, creating tables and instruments that made accurate horoscope construction possible without complex computations. The astrolabe, perfected by Islamic craftsmen, allowed astrologers to determine planetary positions and house cusps quickly. These brass instruments, often beautifully decorated with arabesque patterns, became symbols of learning throughout the Islamic world. The Zij, comprehensive astronomical tables, provided planetary positions for centuries in advance, eliminating the need for constant observation. Al-Kindi, the 9th century philosopher, known as the philosopher of the Arabs, developed a theory of stellar rays that explained astrological influence through physical emanations. He proposed that all objects in the universe emitted rays that carried their essential qualities, with celestial bodies producing especially powerful emanations due to their size and distance. This theory provided a mechanistic explanation for astrology that avoided theological problems about divine causation, making it acceptable within Islamic philosophical frameworks. The Persian astrologer Abu Ruyan al-Biruni, working in the 11th century, brought unprecedented scientific rigor to astrological study. His book of instruction in the elements of the art of astrology presented astrology as an exact science requiring precise mathematical calculation and careful observation. Al-Biruni also studied Indian astrology during his travels, comparing different systems and noting their agreements and divergences. His critical approach elevated astrology's intellectual status while acknowledging its limitations and uncertainties. Islamic astrologers refined the house system, developing new methods for dividing the celestial sphere that would become standard in European practice. The Alkabisi's house system, named after the 10th century astrologer Al-Kabisi, divided the diurnal arc into equal portions, creating a mathematically elegant solution that many astrologers preferred to earlier methods. These technical innovations made Islamic astrology more precise and systematic than its Hellenistic predecessors. The doctrine of reception, where planets in each other's signs gained mutual support, was elaborated by Islamic astrologers into a complex system of planetary relationships. They distinguished between different types of reception based on domicile, exaltation, triplicity, term, and face rulerships. This nuanced understanding of planetary interaction allowed for more sophisticated interpretation of horoscopes, recognizing subtle modifications of planetary influence based on complex networks of celestial relationship. Medical astrology achieved particular prominence in the Islamic world, where physicians were expected to understand celestial influences on health and disease. The great physician Al-Razi wrote extensively on astrological medicine, arguing that treatment effectiveness varied with planetary configurations. Islamic medical texts included detailed instructions for timing treatments according to lunar phases and planetary hours, integrating astrology fully into medical practice. The decumbiture, a horoscope cast for the moment a patient took to their bed, became a standard diagnostic tool. The practice of mundane astrology, predicting political and social events, reached new heights of sophistication under Islamic astrologers. They developed the theory of great conjunctions, particularly of Jupiter and Saturn, which occurred every 20 years and marked significant historical shifts. The conjunctions, zodiacal element, changing every 200 years, indicated broader epochal transformations. This system provided a framework for understanding historical cycles that influenced both Islamic and later European historiography. Islamic rulers regularly employed court astrologers who advised on matters of state and personal concern. The Caliph al-Ma'mun reportedly would not undertake any significant action without astrological consultation. These court astrologers wielded considerable influence, sometimes determining the timing of military campaigns or the appointment of officials based on celestial considerations. Their position required diplomatic skill as well as astrological knowledge, navigating political intrigue while maintaining their credibility. The question of astrology's compatibility with Islamic faith generated extensive theological debate. While some religious authorities condemned astrology as challenging divine omnipotence, others argued it was permissible as long as practitioners acknowledged that Allah ultimately controlled all outcomes. The distinction between reading celestial signs and attributing independent power to stars became crucial. Many Islamic scholars accepted astrology as part of natural philosophy, while rejecting any suggestion that stars competed with divine sovereignty. The transmission of Islamic astrological knowledge to Christian Europe began in the 11th century through Spain, where Islamic, Christian, and Jewish scholars interacted in a unique, multicultural environment. The city of Toledo, reconquered by Christians in 1085, became the primary center for translating Arabic texts into Latin. Gerard of Cremona, working in Toledo, translated over 70 works from Arabic, including crucial astrological texts that would reshape European thought. The Jewish community played a vital intermediary role in transmitting Islamic astrology to Christian Europe. Jewish scholars like Abraham, Ibn, Ezra, and Mashallah were equally at home in Arabic and Hebrew, later learning Latin to communicate with Christian scholars. They translated texts, taught techniques, and served as cultural bridges between Islamic and Christian intellectual worlds. A contribution ensured that Islamic astrological innovations reached European practitioners intact. Katasan tables, commissioned by Alfonso X in the 13th century, exemplified the successful transfer of Islamic astronomical knowledge to Christian Europe based on earlier Islamic siege. These tables provided accurate planetary positions that European astrologers would use for centuries. The collaboration of Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars in their creation demonstrated how astrological knowledge transcended religious boundaries. By 1200 CE, Islamic scholars had not only preserved ancient astrological knowledge, but had transformed it through mathematical innovation, philosophical sophistication, and systematic development. They created new techniques, refined existing methods, provided theoretical frameworks that made astrology intellectually respectable. The Arabic parts, refined house systems, and naturalistic explanations for celestial influence became permanent features of Western astrology. Most importantly, Islamic civilization's commitment to scholarship ensured that astrological knowledge survived the collapse of classical civilization, ready to spark a revival in medieval Europe that would carry celestial wisdom into the modern age. The Gothic cathedrals rising across 13th century Europe embodied a new synthesis of faith and reason, their soaring arches reaching toward heaven while their foundations rested firmly on mathematical principles. This architectural harmony reflected a broader intellectual reconciliation taking place in the newly founded universities, where Christian theologians grappled with the flood of Aristotelian and Arabic learning pouring in through translation centers. Among the most challenging subjects requiring integration was astrology, which arrived clothed in Islamic sophistication, but carrying echoes of pagan antiquity that troubled Christian conscience. Thomas Aquinas, the Dominican friar, whose systematic theology would define Catholic orthodoxy for centuries, tackled the problem of astrology with characteristic thoroughness. Writing in Paris and Naples during the mid-13th century, Aquinas distinguished between legitimate natural astrology and illicit superstitious practices. He accepted that celestial bodies influenced the physical world in human bodies, following Aristotelian physics that saw the heavens as the source of all change in the sublunary realm. The stars could incline human behavior by affecting bodily humors and temperaments, but they could not compel the rational soul, which remained free to choose virtue or sin. This Thomistic compromise opened the door for astrology's entry into medieval universities as part of the quadrivium, the higher division of the liberal arts comprising arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Medical students at Bologna, Paris, and Oxford were required to study astrology as essential preparation for practice. University statutes mandated that physicians calculate natal horoscopes to understand patients' temperamental predispositions and cast decomposure charts to track disease progression. The prestigious medical faculty at the University of Montpellier required 5 years of study, with extensive training in astronomical calculation and astrological interpretation. Guido Bonatti, the 13th century Italian astrologer, exemplified the medieval professional practitioner who served both secular and religious authorities. His Liber Astronomiae, one of the most comprehensive astrological textbooks of the Middle Ages, covered every branch of the art, from natal interpretation to weather prediction. Bonatti's clients included the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II and various Italian city-states who employed him to determine auspicious times for military campaigns. His success demonstrated that despite theological reservations, practical rulers valued astrological counsel in matters of state. The medieval understanding of celestial influence rested on a hierarchical cosmos inherited from Aristotle and Christianized by scholastic philosophy. God governed the universe from the empyrean heaven beyond the sphere of fixed stars. Below this, the crystalline spheres carrying planets transmitted divine influence downward through angelic intelligences. Each planet sphere was guided by an angel who executed God's will through celestial motion. This cosmology made astrology theologically acceptable by subordinating planetary influence to divine providence, with stars serving as instruments rather than independent powers. Pietro d'Abano, professor of medicine at Padua in the early 14th century, pushed the boundaries of acceptable astrological practice with his conciliator, which attempted to reconcile medical and astrological authorities. He taught that each part of the human body was governed by zodiacal signs and planets, making astrological knowledge essential for effective treatment. His work on astrological images, talismans engraved under specific celestial configurations, ventured into dangerous territory that would later bring posthumous charges of heresy. Yet, his influence on medical astrology persisted through numerous reprints of his works. The Black Death that devastated Europe between 1347 and 1351 intensified interest in astrological explanation and prediction. The Paris medical faculty issued a formal report attributing the plague to a malefic conjunction of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn in Aquarius that had occurred in 1345. This celestial explanation, combining Aristotelian natural philosophy with astrological tradition, seemed more satisfying than admitting complete ignorance about the catastrophe's cause. Astrologers gained prominence as people desperately sought to understand and predict the plague's recurrence. Court astrology flourished in the later Middle Ages as rulers increasingly relied on celestial counsel for political and military decisions. Charles V of France, known as Charles the Wise, maintained a team of court astrologers and amassed one of Europe's largest astrological libraries. He regulated his daily activities according to planetary hours and commissioned elaborate astrological manuscripts illuminated with gold leaf and precious pigments. His patronage elevated astrology's status, making it fashionable among the nobility who emulated royal interests. The development of the equal house system by Johannes Campanus in the 10th century represented a significant technical advance in medieval astrology. His mathematical approach to house division, based on dividing the prime vertical into equal arcs, provided an alternative to earlier methods and demonstrated ongoing innovation in astrological technique. Medieval astrologers were not merely passive recipients of ancient wisdom, but active developers of new methods and refinements. Universities became centers for producing annual prognostications, almanacs that combined astronomical data with astrological predictions for the coming year. These publications, initially copied by hand in university scriptoria, predicted weather patterns, disease outbreaks, political upheavals, and favorable times for various activities. Professors supplemented their incomes by producing these almanacs, which found eager audiences among merchants, farmers, and aristocrats alike. The almanac tradition established astrology as a practical tool for planning and decision-making across social classes. The medieval Catholic Church maintained an ambiguous relationship with astrology, officially condemning deterministic judicial astrology while tolerating natural astrology and even employing astrologers. Popes and bishops consulted astrologers for medical treatment and architectural projects, recognizing celestial influence on physical matters. The Vatican Library accumulated extensive astrological manuscripts, preserving texts that might otherwise have disappeared. This practical accommodation coexisted uneasily with periodic theological condemnations, creating a complex environment where astrologers operated in a gray zone between acceptance and persecution. Richard of Wallingford, abbot of St. Albans, and one of 14th century England's greatest scientists, embodied the medieval integration of religious vocation and astrological learning. He designed and built elaborate astronomical instruments, including a mechanical clock that displayed planetary positions and predicted eclipses. His mathematical treatises advanced both astronomy and astrology, showing how monastic communities could be centers of celestial learning. The monastery's resources supported scholarly work that individual practitioners could not accomplish alone. The concept of astrological ages gained prominence in medieval thought, particularly the idea that history unfolded through great conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn. The conjunction of 1345s, blamed for the Black Death, was seen as marking a fundamental historical transition. Astrologers calculated backwards to identify previous conjunctions with major events, creating an astrological framework for understanding historical change. This cyclical view of history influenced medieval chroniclers who incorporated astrological explanations into their narratives. Medical astrology reached new levels of complexity in medieval practice, with physicians developing elaborate systems for diagnosis and treatment. The zodiac man, a diagram showing zodiacal rulership over body parts, became ubiquitous in medical manuscripts. Surgeons avoided operating when the moon occupied the sign ruling the affected organ. Herbs were gathered at astrologically determined times to maximize their potency. This integration of astrology into medicine was not considered superstition, but cutting-edge medical science based on the best available understanding of cosmic influences. The rise of mechanical clocks in the 14th century revolutionized astrological practice by enabling precise time measurement essential for accurate house calculation. Previously, astrologers had relied on sundials, water clocks, or estimation, introducing significant errors into horoscope construction. Mechanical clocks, often installed in cathedral towers, provided public timekeeping that made exact birth times more readily available. This technological advance increased astrology's precision and credibility. Jewish astrologers continued playing crucial roles in medieval Europe, translating texts and teaching techniques derived from Islamic sources. Kudo, working in Spain before the 1492 expulsion, created astronomical tables of unprecedented accuracy that Columbus would later carry on his voyages. Jewish practitioners often served Christian rulers who valued their learning while officially maintaining religious restrictions. This cross-cultural exchange enriched medieval astrology with diverse traditions and perspectives. The invention of printing in the mid-15th century transformed astrology from an elite pursuit to an increasingly popular practice. The first printed ephemeris appeared in 1474, making planetary positions widely available without laborious calculation. Printed almanacs reached audiences far beyond university walls, spreading astrological concepts throughout literate society. The Calendar of Shepherds, first printed in 1491, combined astrological information with religious and practical content, becoming one of the most popular books of its era. Marsilio Ficino, the Florentine philosopher and physician, elevated astrology to new philosophical heights in the late 15th century through his revival of Platonic and Hermetic thought. His work on astrological magic, De Vita Coelitus Comparanda, explained how to draw down celestial influences through music, images, and rituals aligned with planetary forces. Ficino's learned astrology, grounded in ancient philosophy and aimed at spiritual development, contrasted with popular fortune-telling while demonstrating astrology's continued intellectual vitality. By 1500, astrology had achieved a remarkable position in European culture, simultaneously embedded in university curricula, medical practice, court politics, and popular consciousness. The medieval period had successfully integrated this ancient art into Christian civilization through careful theological negotiation and practical accommodation. Technical innovations, from new house systems to mechanical clocks, enhanced precision, while printing began democratizing access to celestial knowledge. As Europe stood on the threshold of the Renaissance and Reformation, astrology seemed secure in its cultural position, unaware that the coming centuries would bring challenges that would fundamentally transform its status and practice. The dawning of the 16th century brought Columbus's ships home from the New World. Luther's hammer blows on Wittenberg's church door, and Copernicus's revolutionary proposition that Earth circled the sun. These upheavals in geography, theology, cosmology would shake astrology's foundations, even as the art reached unprecedented popularity among both princes and peasants. The period between 1500 and 1650 witnessed astrology's greatest cultural triumph and the beginning of its scientific decline, a paradox that would define its modern transformation from universal wisdom to specialized knowledge. Nicolaus Copernicus, the Polish canon whose De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium appeared in 1543, created a crisis for astrology that went beyond mere technical adjustment by placing the sun at the cosmic center and making Earth just another planet. Copernican theory challenged the fundamental distinction between celestial and terrestrial realms that underpinned astrological philosophy. If Earth moved through the heavens like Mars or Venus, how could the planets influence it from above? The hierarchical cosmos that made astrological influence comprehensible suddenly seemed questionable. Yet, most 16th century astrologers adapted to heliocentrism with surprising ease, arguing that what mattered was not absolute cosmic position, but relative planetary relationships as observed from Earth. The mathematical equivalence between geocentric and heliocentric calculations for planetary positions meant that, quote, practical horoscope construction remained unchanged. Astrologers could accept Copernican astronomy for calculation while maintaining a philosophical geocentrism for interpretation. This pragmatic accommodation allowed astrology to survive its first great cosmological crisis. The Protestant Reformation created new contexts for astrological practice as different. Christian denominations developed varying attitudes toward celestial divination. Luther himself held complex views, accepting natural astrology's influence on weather and temperament while condemning judicial astrology's claims about individual fate. He famously declared himself born under Saturn, acknowledging planetary influence on personality while maintaining that faith transcended stellar determination. Lutheran territories generally permitted astrological practice within bounds, similar to those established by Aquinas centuries earlier. Philip Melanchthon, Luther's intellectual companion and systematizer of Lutheran theology, actively promoted astrology within Protestant education. As professor at Wittenberg, he taught that celestial influences were part of God's natural order, comparing planetary effects to the manifest influences of sun and moon. His integration of astrology into Protestant university curricula ensured its continuation in Reformed territories. Melanchthon's numerous students spread this accepting attitude throughout Protestant Europe, making Wittenberg a center for astrological learning. John Dee, the Elizabethan magus, who served as court astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I, embodied the Renaissance fusion of mathematical science, hermetic philosophy, and practical statecraft. Dee chose the astrologically auspicious moment for Elizabeth's coronation in 1559, ceremony whose timing he calculated to ensure a long and prosperous reign. His vast library at Mortlake contained over 4,000 volumes, including rare astrological manuscripts he had rescued from dissolved monasteries. K.H. combination of serious scholarship and occult practice made him simultaneously one of England's most learned men and most controversial figures. The Spanish conquistadors carried astrology to the Americas, where it encountered indigenous astronomical traditions of remarkable sophistication. Aztec and Maya calendrical systems incorporated complex astrological elements that surprised European observers with their accuracy and depth. The mixing of European and indigenous astrological traditions created syncretic practices that persist in Latin American folk astrology today. Colonial authorities attempted to suppress indigenous divination while simultaneously employing their own astrologers, creating a complex cultural negotiation around celestial knowledge. Stradamus, the French physician whose prophetic quatrains would achieve enduring fame, practiced a form of astrology that blended traditional techniques with intuitive vision, publishing his first almanac in 1550. He quickly gained reputation for successful predictions, attracting the patronage of Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France. His cryptic verses, deliberately obscure to avoid charges of heresy or sedition, created a new genre of astrological prophecy that emphasized dramatic prediction over technical precision. The Nostradamus phenomenon demonstrated astrology's evolution from mathematical science toward popular mysticism. The witch hunts that peaked between 1580 and 1630 created dangerous conditions for astrologers who could be accused of diabolic practice. The distinction between legitimate natural astrology and illicit sorcery became literally a matter of life and death. Many astrologers emphasized their mathematical learning and natural philosophy to distance themselves from popular magic. Others were less fortunate, caught in the hysteria that saw satanic influence everywhere. The persecution created a chilling effect that pushed serious astrological practice further into elite circles, while popular astrology became increasingly associated with dangerous superstition. Tycho Brahe, a Danish astronomer whose precise observations would enable Kepler's revolutionary discoveries, maintained active astrological practice alongside his astronomical research. His observatory at Uraniborg included facilities for casting horoscopes as well as observing stars. Brahe believed that accurate astrology required precise astronomical data, driving his decades-long project to map stellar and planetary positions with unprecedented accuracy. His fusion of observational astronomy and astrological application represented the last generation where leading scientists practiced astrology without embarrassment. Johannes Kepler, who discovered the laws of planetary motion, struggled throughout his life to reform astrology on sound physical principles. He rejected most traditional astrological doctrine as superstition, while maintaining that celestial influences were real and measurable. His theory of harmonics proposed that planetary aspects created resonances similar to musical intervals affecting Earth through geometric rather than occult principles. Kepler's attempted reformations failed to convince either scientists or astrologers, but his serious engagement showed that astrology still commanded attention from the greatest minds. The 30 Years' War that devastated Central Europe from 1618 to 1648 saw extensive use of astrological propaganda and prediction. Military commanders consulted astrologers for battle timing, while propagandists published prognostications promising victory to their side. Wallenstein, the imperial generalissimo, famously employed Kepler as his personal astrologer. Though Kepler privately expressed skepticism about military predictions, the war's apocalyptic character encouraged astrological interpretation, with the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 1623, seen as marking a fundamental historical transition. Medical astrology reached its greatest elaboration in this period through figures like Nicholas Culpeper, whose herbal remedies incorporated extensive astrological timing. His English physician, published in 1652, made astrological medicine accessible to ordinary readers by translating Latin pharmaceutical texts and adding extensive astrological instructions. Culpeper argued that herbs should be gathered when their ruling planets were strong and administered when planetary configurations supported healing. His democratization of medical astrology challenged the professional medical establishment while spreading astrological concepts throughout popular health practice. The development of the telescope, first used astronomically by Galileo in 1609, created new problems for astrological theory. The discovery of Jupiter's moons showed that celestial bodies could orbit centers other than Earth, further complicating traditional cosmology. More troublingly, if invisible moons influenced Jupiter, might Earth have invisible satellites affecting human life? The discovery of new celestial objects raised questions about the completeness of traditional astrology. Should these new bodies be incorporated into horoscopes? And if so, how could their influences be determined without centuries of observation? Print culture transformed astrology into a commercial enterprise of unprecedented scale. Annual almanacs became among the most widely distributed publications after the Bible, reaching even barely literate rural populations. These publications mix astronomical data, weather predictions, medical advice, political prognostication in formats accessible to common readers. The most successful almanac authors became wealthy celebrities, their predictions discussed in taverns and courts alike. This commercialization spread astrological concepts throughout society, while arguably diluting its intellectual content. The English Civil War saw both royalists and parliamentarians employ astrologers as propagandists and intelligence analysts. William Lilly, Parliament's chief astrologer, published pamphlets predicting victory for the parliamentary cause, his successful predictions enhancing his reputation and astrology's credibility. His Christian Astrology, published in 1647, became the first comprehensive astrological textbook in English, making advanced techniques available to readers without Latin education. Lilly's success demonstrated astrology's continued relevance in political discourse, even as a scientific evolution gathered momentum. The rise of mechanical philosophy associated with Descartes began, undermining astrology's theoretical foundations by proposing that all physical interactions required material contact. If planets could not influence Earth through physical emanations or mechanical forces, how could astrology work? The Cartesian worldview left no room for action at a distance or occult influences, creating a conceptual framework inherently hostile to astrological claims. This philosophical shift would prove more damaging to astrology than astronomical discoveries, attacking its fundamental premises rather than merely its technical details. Colonial expansion exposed Europeans to diverse astrological traditions from India, China, and the Islamic world, creating both enrichment and confusion. Jesuit missionaries to China discovered a sophisticated astrological system completely independent of Western tradition, raising questions about astrology's universality. If different cultures attributed different meanings to the same celestial phenomena, how could astrology claim objective truth? This encounter with alternative systems began undermining confidence in astrology's absolute validity, while paradoxically demonstrating its universal appeal. By 1650, Astrology stood at a crossroads between its medieval integration into mainstream intellectual culture and its modern marginalization as pseudoscience. The period had witnessed both astrology's greatest popular triumph and the emergence of ideas that would ultimately exclude it from scientific discourse. The heliocentric revolution, Protestant Reformation, witch hunts, telescope observations, mechanical philosophy, and colonial encounters had all challenged different aspects of astrological tradition. Yet astrology adapted and survived, transforming from universal science to specialized knowledge, from elite philosophy to popular practice, setting patterns that would define its contested status in the modern world. The second half of the 17th century marked a profound transformation in European intellectual life as natural philosophy gave way to experimental science, and ancient authorities yielded to empirical observation. The Royal Society of London, founded in 1660, adopted as its motto nullius in verba, taking no one's word for it. Direct challenge to the textual traditions that had sustained astrology for millennia. This new scientific culture demanded experimental proof and mechanical explanation, criteria that astrology, based on centuries of accumulated tradition and celestial correspondence, could not easily satisfy. Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica, published in 1687, provided a mechanical explanation for planetary motion that required no astrological emanations or celestial influences beyond gravity. His laws of motion and universal gravitation explained the heavens through the same forces operating on Earth, eliminating the fundamental distinction between celestial and terrestrial realms. Paradoxically, Newton himself studied alchemy and biblical prophecy, believing in subtle influences beyond mechanical forces. Yet, his public work created a framework that left no room for astrological causation. The concept of action at a distance troubled many natural philosophers who sought purely mechanical explanations for all phenomena. If gravity itself seemed occult, operating across empty space without material connection, how much more problematic were astrological influences? Some astrologers attempted to explain celestial effects through subtle material emanations or atmospheric tides caused by planetary gravity. But these explanations satisfied neither scientists demanding experimental proof nor traditional astrologers committed to symbolic correspondence. The Enlightenment project of rational reform targeted astrology as a prime example of superstition impeding human progress. Voltaire mocked astrologers in his satirical works, presenting them as charlatans exploiting human credulity. The Encyclopedia of Diderot and d'Alembert, that monument to Enlightenment thought, dismissed astrology as a false science based on imaginary influences. These attacks came not from religious authorities defending orthodoxy, but from secular intellectuals promoting reason and empiricism as the sole sources of valid knowledge. Pierre Bell's Historical and Critical Dictionary, published at the dawn of the 18th century, subjected astrological claims to withering skeptical analysis. He examined famous predictions, showing how astrologers retrofitted vague prognostications to events after they occurred. His methodical demolition of astrological authority demonstrated the new critical methods being applied to all traditional knowledge. Bell's work became a model for Enlightenment criticism, teaching readers to question authority and demand evidence. Universities across Europe gradually expelled astrology from their curricula during this period. The University of Paris ceased teaching astrology in medical education by 1700, while German universities maintained it slightly longer before yielding to modernizing pressures. Astronomy separated definitively from astrology, becoming a purely observational and mathematical science. Young scholars, ambitious for academic careers, learned to distance themselves from astrological associations that could damage their reputations among the scientific elite. Yet, astrology's expulsion from elite institutions coincided with its flourishing in popular culture through almanacs that reached unprecedented circulation. Poor Richard's Almanac, published by Benjamin Franklin from 1732 to 1758, mixed astrological predictions with practical wisdom and political commentary. Franklin himself expressed skepticism about astrology while recognizing its commercial value. It's a pragmatic attitude shared by many almanac publishers who satisfied public demand regardless of personal belief. The proliferation of coffee houses and reading societies in 18th century cities created new venues for astrological discussion outside academic control. Popular astrologers held court in London coffee houses, offering horoscope readings to merchants and tradesmen. These urban spaces democratized esoteric knowledge, making astrological consultation available to the rising middle classes. The coffeehouse astrologer became a stock figure in 18th century literature, representing both popular credulity and the persistence of traditional wisdom. Rural communities maintained astrological practices through oral tradition and manuscript circulation, largely unaffected by elite intellectual debates. Farmers continued planting by moon phases, belief supported by accumulated agricultural experience, even if scientific theory could not explain the correlation. Village-wise, women incorporated astrological timing into herbal medicine and midwifery. These folk practices preserved astrological knowledge outside written tradition, ensuring its survival even as printed sources became increasingly skeptical. The Enlightenment's impact varied significantly across European regions, with astrology maintaining stronger positions in areas where Enlightenment ideas penetrated less deeply. In Russia, astrology continued to influence court decisions well into the 18th century. Spain and Portugal, where the Inquisition suppressed Enlightenment literature, saw less dramatic decline in astrological practice. The Ottoman Empire maintained active astrological traditions throughout this period, unaffected by European intellectual fashions. Freemasonry and other esoteric societies provide a refuge for astrological knowledge among educated elites who publicly conformed to Enlightenment rationalism. Masonic symbolism incorporated astrological elements, while higher degrees explored Hermetic traditions, including celestial influences. These secret societies preserved and transmitted astrological learning through ritual and symbol rather than explicit instruction, creating an underground stream of esoteric knowledge parallel to public scientific discourse. The discovery of Uranus by William Herschel in 1781 created a crisis for traditional astrology while potentially offering new validation. Here was a planet unknown to the ancients, invisible without telescopes, yet presumably influencing human affairs throughout history. Some astrologers argued this discovery proved astrology's incompleteness, requiring fundamental revision. Others attempted to incorporate Uranus retroactively, claiming its influence explained previously puzzling historical patterns. The debate revealed astrology's difficulty adapting to new astronomical discoveries within its traditional framework. Emanuel Swedenborg, the Swedish scientist turned mystic, developed a spiritual cosmology that reinterpreted astrological correspondence through direct spiritual experience rather than physical influence. His doctrine of correspondences proposed that celestial bodies represented spiritual states rather than causing material effects. This spiritualization of astrology would influence later esoteric movements, offering a way to maintain astrological symbolism while abandoning claims of physical causation that science had discredited. The American and French revolutions demonstrated astrology's declining influence on political decision-making among educated elites, while popular almanacs still offered political predictions. Revolutionary leaders justified their actions through rational political philosophy rather than celestial authority. The Declaration of Independence appealed to natural law and self-evident truths, not astrological timing. This marked a fundamental shift from earlier eras when major political decisions required astrological consultation. Medical practice gradually abandoned astrological considerations as physicians embraced anatomical and chemical explanations for disease. The rise of clinical observation and statistical methods in medicine left no room for celestial influences that could not be measured or tested. By 1800, a physician consulting planetary positions would be considered a quack by professional colleagues, though many patients still sought astrological medical advice from folk practitioners. The Romantic movement, emerging in the late 18th century, began rehabilitating astrology as poetic truth rather than literal science. German Romantic philosophers like Novalis and Schelling explored astrology as symbolic system, expressing deep truths about human connection to nature. This aesthetic appreciation of astrology as metaphor rather than mechanism would become increasingly important for its survival in the modern world. Publishing economics kept astrology commercially viable, even as intellectual respectability disappeared. Almanacs remained profitable, supporting a class of professional astrologers who served popular audiences regardless of elite opinion. The expansion of literacy and cheap printing meant more people could access astrological literature than ever before, even as the quality of that literature arguably declined from its Renaissance heights. Women began emerging as notable astrological practitioners in this period, partly because exclusion from universities and scientific societies left alternative paths more attractive. Sarah Janor published almanacs in England during the 1660s, while other women offered astrological consultations from their homes. This feminization of astrological practice would accelerate in coming centuries as the profession became increasingly marginal to masculine-dominated scientific culture. Colonial administrators and missionaries encountered sophisticated, non-European astrological systems that challenged Western assumptions about celestial interpretation. Indian astrology's different zodiac and Chinese astrology's animal years demonstrated that astrological symbolism was culturally constructed rather than universally given. These encounters further undermined astrology's claims to objective truth while revealing its universal human appeal across cultures. By 1800, astrology had completed its transformation from universal science to marginal belief, from elite philosophy to popular superstition, from required university curriculum to excluded pseudoscience. The scientific revolution and enlightenment had successfully severed astrology from natural philosophy, creating the modern distinction between astronomy and astrology that would have puzzled earlier generations. Yet, astrology survives this intellectual catastrophe by adapting to new cultural niches, co-serving psychological and spiritual needs that mechanistic science could not address. Its retreat from universities and academies marked not its death, but its metamorphosis, as it prepared to re-emerge in new forms suited to the modern world that had seemingly rejected it. The 19th century dawned with astrology at its lowest ebb in Western history, dismissed by scientists, banned from universities, and practiced mainly by almanac writers and fortune-tellers, serving credulous masses. Yet, within this apparent defeat lay seeds of renewal that would transform astrology from fortune-telling superstition into a sophisticated system of psychological and spiritual insight. The Victorian era's fascination with the occult, combined with Eastern spiritual influences and new printing technologies, would create conditions for astrology's most dramatic reinvention since Hellenistic times. The Romantic movement's emphasis on imagination, intuition, and organic unity between humanity and nature created intellectual space for reconsidering astrology's symbolic truth, even if its literal claims had been discredited. German idealist philosophers explored astrology as expressing archetypal patterns underlying both consciousness and cosmos. Though few intellectuals openly advocated astrological practice, many acknowledged its poetic power to represent human participation in cosmic rhythms. This philosophical rehabilitation prepared ground for astrology's eventual return to educated circles. The British Rajah's encounter with Indian astrology, known as Jyotish, profoundly influenced Western astrological revival. Colonial administrators and scholars discovered a living tradition of sophisticated astrological practice integrated into Indian society at every level. Unlike European astrology's marginal status, Jyotish remained respected even among educated Indians, with complex mathematical techniques and philosophical frameworks that impressed Western observers. Translations of Sanskrit astrological texts introduced concepts like dashas, planetary periods, unknown to Western tradition, enriching the technical vocabulary available to reformist astrologers. Raphael's Ephemeris, first published in 1820 by Robert Cross Smith under his astrological pseudonym, marked a crucial development in astrology's modernization. By providing accurate planetary positions in an affordable format, Raphael democratized horoscope calculation, enabling anyone with basic mathematical skills to cast charts. The Ephemeris' annual publication created a reliable infrastructure for astrological practice independent of astronomical institutions that had rejected astrology. This technical foundation proved essential for the astrological revival that followed. The Victorian crisis of faith, as scientific materialism challenged religious certainty, created a spiritual vacuum that alternative belief systems rushed to fill. Spiritualism, with its seances and spirit communications, demonstrated widespread hunger for evidence of survival beyond death and meaning beyond material existence. Astrology offered a middle path between discredited religious dogma and soulless scientific materialism, providing cosmic meaning without requiring specific theological commitment. This positioning would become increasingly important as traditional religious authority continued declining. The formation of the Theosophical Society in New York in 1875 by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and Henry Steele Olcott created an organizational framework for serious occult study, including astrology. Theosophy synthesized Eastern and Western esoteric traditions, presenting astrology as ancient wisdom preserved through initiatic traditions. Blavatsky's massive works, Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, incorporated astrological symbolism into an elaborate cosmology that attracted educated seekers dissatisfied with both orthodox religion and materialist science. Theosophical astrology differed significantly from traditional practice by emphasizing spiritual evolution over mundane predictions. The natal chart became a map of karmic lessons and soul purpose rather than a blueprint for worldly success. This spiritualization of astrology made it acceptable to middle-class Victorians who would have rejected fortune-telling as vulgar superstition. Theosophical lodges across Europe and America became centers for astrological study, creating networks of serious students who approached the subject as spiritual science. Alan Leo, born William Frederick Allen in 1860, emerged as the most influential figure in astrology's modern revival, a working-class Londoner who discovered astrology through Theosophy. Leo revolutionized astrological practice through systematic modernization and commercialization. His postal horoscope service, launched in 1898, offered brief chart interpretations for a shilling, making professional astrology accessible to thousands who could never afford personal consultations. Within a decade, Leo's business had processed over 20,000 horoscopes, demonstrating astrology's massive latent market. Leo's textbooks, beginning with Astrology for All in 1899, presented astrology in clear, modern English, stripped of archaic terminology and medieval superstition. He emphasized character analysis over event prediction, arguing that astrology revealed psychological tendencies rather than fixed fate. Hayes' famous maxim, "Character is destiny," shifted focus from external events to internal development, making astrology relevant to modern concerns about personality and self-understanding. This psychological turn would prove crucial for astrology's 20th century development. The Astrological Lodge of London, founded by Leo in 1915, established astrology's first modern professional organization. The lodge provided lectures, classes, and certification programs, creating standards for professional practice. Its journal, Modern Astrology, disseminated new techniques and interpretations while building community among isolated practitioners. This institutional framework elevated astrology from individual eccentricity to organized movement, enabling systematic development and transmission of knowledge. Women played increasingly prominent roles in astrology's revival, finding opportunities for intellectual and professional development unavailable in conventional fields. Safario's student Bessie Leo, Alan Leo's wife and business partner, became a noted astrologer in her own right. Isabella Pagan wrote influential textbooks that remained standard references for decades. These women brought different perspectives to astrological interpretation, often emphasizing intuitive and psychological dimensions over technical calculation. The emergence of sun sign astrology dramatically simplified astrological practice while expanding its popular reach by focusing on the sun's zodiacal position at birth, easily determined from birth date alone. Sun sign astrology eliminated the need for precise birth times and complex calculations, though serious astrologers recognized this as crude oversimplification. Sun sign columns began appearing in magazines and newspapers, introducing millions to basic astrological concepts. Evangeline Adams became America's most famous astrologer in the early 20th century, with a client list including J.P. Morgan, Mary Pickford, and other celebrities. Her successful legal defense against fortune-telling charges in 1914 established astrology's legitimacy in American law. Adams's radio program, beginning in 1930, reached millions of listeners, demonstrating broadcast media's potential for spreading astrological ideas. Her success showed astrology could thrive in modern commercial culture while maintaining claims to ancient wisdom. The First World War's catastrophic impact intensified interest in astrology as people sought meaning in apparently senseless destruction. Astrologers retroactively identified celestial configurations that had portended the conflict, while offering hope that planetary cycles promised eventual peace. The war's psychological trauma created a clientele seeking comfort and guidance that traditional institutions seemed unable to provide. This pattern of increased astrological interest during crisis periods would repeat throughout the 20th century. Psychological concepts began infiltrating astrological interpretation even before psychology emerged as a distinct discipline. Astrologers spoke of complexes, unconscious motivations, and personality types in ways that anticipated psychoanalytic insights. This psychological vocabulary made astrology seem modern and scientific rather than medieval and superstitious. The convergence between astrological and psychological languages would accelerate in coming decades, fundamentally transforming both fields. The development of aspectarian techniques by British astrologers refined understanding of planetary relationships beyond traditional major aspects. Minor aspects, like the semi-square and sesquiquadrate, were incorporated into interpretation, enabling more nuanced chart analysis. These technical innovations showed astrology remained capable of evolution despite its ancient origins, adapting to modern demands for precision and complexity. Newspapers discovered astrology's commercial value in the early 20th century, though regular horoscope columns would not become standard until the 1930s. Early newspaper astrology focused on annual predictions and celebrity horoscopes rather than daily sun sign forecasts. This media exposure, though often trivialized, kept astrology in public consciousness and created career opportunities for professional astrologers. The Indian independence movement brought renewed Western attention to Vedic astrology as Indian intellectuals asserted their cultural traditions. Value against colonial dismissal. B. V. Ramon, born in 1912, began building bridges between Eastern and Western astrology that would profoundly influence late 20th century practice. This cross-fertilization enriched both traditions while highlighting astrology's universal themes across cultures. Scientific attempts to test astrology began in this period, as Michel Gauquelin's statistical studies of planetary positions in professional athletes' charts, though his results proved controversial and difficult to replicate. They suggested possible empirical validation for astrological claims. This empirical approach, whether supporting or debunking astrology, marked a shift from purely philosophical arguments to experimental investigation. By 1920, astrology had successfully reinvented itself for the modern age, shedding medieval superstition while retaining ancient symbolism. The transformation from fortune-telling to character analysis, from fate to psychology, from secret knowledge to public commodity, established patterns that would define 20th century astrology. Alan Leo's modernization, Theosophy's spiritualization, and media's popularization created a resilient framework that could adapt to changing cultural conditions while maintaining connection to tradition. Astrology entered the modern era not as discredited superstition, but as a reimagined system addressing perennial human needs for meaning, identity, and cosmic connection in an increasingly disenchanted world. The decade following the First World War witnessed a remarkable convergence between depth, psychology, and astrological symbolism that would fundamentally transform both fields. Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who broke with Freud to develop analytical psychology, began investigating astrology seriously in the 1920s, not as fortune-telling, but as a projection of unconscious psychological content onto celestial phenomena. His engagement with astrological symbolism would provide intellectual credibility and theoretical framework for astrology's psychological reformation, elevating it from occult practice to therapeutic tool. Jung's concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidence without causal connection, offered a theoretical explanation for astrological correspondence that sidestepped the scientific objection to celestial causation. Rather than planets causing earthly events, synchronicity suggested that celestial and terrestrial phenomena could be meaningfully related through what Jung called a causal connecting principle. This framework allowed educated people to take astrology seriously without accepting that distant planets physically influenced human behavior, solving the mechanistic paradox that had plagued astrology since the scientific revolution. The collective unconscious, Jung's most revolutionary concept, provided another bridge between psychology and astrology. The planetary gods and zodiacal symbols that astrologers had interpreted for millennia closely resembled the archetypes Jung discovered in dreams, myths, and psychological disturbances. Mercury, the messenger; Venus, the lover; Mars, the warrior. These were not arbitrary associations, but universal patterns of human experience projected onto celestial bodies. Astrology became a symbolic language for discussing psychological dynamics. With a birth chart mapping an individual's archetypal constellation, Jung's astrological experiment, conducted in the early 1950s and published in his work on synchronicity, examined nearly 500 marriage charts for traditional compatibility indicators. Though the statistical results proved inconclusive, Jung's serious engagement with astrological research legitimized it as worthy of scientific investigation. More importantly, his interpretation of the experiment's peculiar patterns as synchronistic phenomena demonstrated how astrology might operate outside conventional causality, opening new theoretical possibilities. Dane Rudger, born Daniel Chenevier in Paris and Ba Jo, immigrated to America, where he would become the most influential astrological theorist of the 20th century, a composer, painter, and philosopher, as well as astrologer. Rudger brought extraordinary cultural sophistication to astrological interpretation. His 1936 book, The Astrology of Personality, synthesized Jungian psychology, Eastern philosophy, and modern physics into a comprehensive reformulation of astrological principles that moved definitively beyond event prediction toward psychological and spiritual insight. Rudger's humanistic astrology emphasized growth, creativity, and self-actualization rather than fate or fortune. The birth chart became a seed pattern of potential development rather than a fixed blueprint of inevitable events. Difficult aspects indicated creative tension and growth opportunities rather than malefic influences to be feared. This positive, growth-oriented approach aligned with emerging humanistic psychology, making astrology relevant to the human potential movement that would flourish in subsequent decades. The concept of cycles became central to Rudger's approach, particularly the progressed lunar cycle and the Saturn return at age 29. These cycles describe psychological and spiritual development through time, providing framework for understanding life crises as growth opportunities rather than random misfortunes. The Saturn return entered popular culture as explanation for the upheavals many experienced approaching 30, demonstrating astrology's capacity to articulate common human experiences through celestial metaphor. Mark Edmund Jones, working contemporaneously with Rudger, developed different but complementary approaches to psychological astrology. His Sabian symbols, a series of images for each zodiacal degree channeled by psychic L.Z. Wheeler, added layers of symbolic meaning to chart interpretation. Jones's emphasis on pattern recognition and Gestalt perception influenced how astrologers synthesized complex chart information into meaningful wholes rather than analyzing isolated factors. The discovery of Pluto in 1930 provided astrologers with a new archetype perfectly suited to depth. Psychology's focus on transformation through confronting shadow material. Pluto became associated with the unconscious depths Freud and Jung had explored, representing powerful, transformative forces operating below conscious awareness. Its slow orbit, taking nearly 250 years to circle the zodiac, suggested generational patterns in collective psychological evolution. The integration of Pluto demonstrated astrology's capacity to incorporate new discoveries within its symbolic framework. Grant Lewis's work in the 1930s and 1940s brought psychological astrology to mass audiences through books like Astrology for the Millions and Heaven Knows What, writing in clear, accessible prose, free of esoteric jargon. Lewis presented astrology as practical psychology, useful for understanding oneself and others. His emphasis on transits as timing mechanisms for psychological development influenced how astrologers conceptualize prediction, shifting from fatalistic events to psychological weather forecasts. The post-World War II period saw explosive growth in astrological interest as returning veterans and expanding middle classes sought meaning beyond material prosperity. The psychological approach proved particularly appealing to educated audiences who rejected fortune-telling but remained open to symbolic systems for self-understanding. University-educated astrologers began producing sophisticated interpretations that drew on mythology, literature, and depth psychology, elevating astrological discourse far above its tabloid representations. Computers revolutionized astrological practice beginning in the 1960s, eliminating the laborious calculations that had limited chart construction to dedicated specialists. What once required hours of mathematical computation could be accomplished in minutes, democratizing horoscope creation. By the 1970s, personal computers enabled any interested person to generate accurate charts, freeing astrologers to focus on interpretation rather than calculation. Technological transformation paralleled astrology's shift from technical craft to interpretive art. The counterculture movement of the 1960s embraced astrology as alternative wisdom, challenging establishment rationality. The Age of Aquarius, popularized by the musical Hair, became symbol for utopian transformation through expanded consciousness. Astrology offered a cosmic framework for understanding the decade's upheavals, birth pangs of a new era rather than social breakdown. This cultural moment established astrology as a central component of alternative spirituality that would persist through subsequent decades. Linda Goodman's Sun Signs, published in 1968, became the first astrology book to reach the New York Times bestseller list, remaining there for years and selling millions of copies. Goodman's engaging, humorous descriptions of zodiacal personalities made astrology accessible and entertaining to mainstream audiences. Though serious astrologers criticized her popularization as oversimplified, her success demonstrated astrology's massive market potential and established sun sign astrology as a permanent feature of popular culture. Stephen Arroyo's integration of astrology with energy concepts from Eastern philosophy and modern physics in the 1970s represented another evolutionary step. His books on astrology, psychology, and energy presented the birth chart as a pattern of energy dynamics rather than fixed character traits. This energetic approach influenced how astrologers understood planetary aspects as energy flows that could be consciously directed rather than immutable psychological facts. Liz Green's synthesis of Jungian psychology with astrology in works like Saturn, A New Look at an Old Devil, brought unprecedented psychological sophistication to astrological interpretation. Green, who earned a doctorate in psychology while maintaining an active astrological practice, demonstrated that serious academic training could enhance, rather than discredit, astrological work. Her Center for Psychological Astrology founded in London in 1983, offered systematic training that integrated depth psychology with traditional astrological techniques. The development of asteroid astrology in the 1970s and 1980s, particularly the inclusion of Chiron, discovered in 1977, added nuance to psychological interpretation. Chiron, orbiting between Saturn and Uranus, became associated with the wounded healer archetype, representing where individuals could transform personal wounds into healing wisdom. The asteroid series Pallas, Juno, and Vesta brought feminine archetypes into charts dominated by masculine planetary symbols, reflecting feminism's influence on astrological interpretation. Evolutionary astrology, developed by Jeffrey Wolf Green and others in the 1980s, incorporated reincarnation and karmic concepts from Eastern philosophy. The birth chart became a map of soul evolution across lifetimes, with Pluto's position indicating evolutionary intentions. This approach appealed to New Age audiences comfortable with concepts mainstream psychology rejected, demonstrating astrology's capacity to adapt to diverse spiritual frameworks. The proliferation of astrological software in the 1980s made sophisticated techniques accessible to casual users. Programs could generate not just birth charts, but progressed charts, composite charts for relationships, and complex predictive techniques that would have required professional astrologers in earlier eras. This technological democratization paralleled astrology's integration into self-help culture, where individuals took responsibility for their own psychological and spiritual development. Research into astrology during this period produced mixed results that satisfied neither skeptics nor believers. Michelle Gauquelin's Mars effect, showing statistical correlation between Mars's position and athletic achievement, proved difficult to replicate consistently. Other studies found no evidence for sun sign personality differences or astrological compatibility. These inconclusive results reinforced the divide between astrology as empirical claim and astrology as symbolic system, with psychological astrologers increasingly emphasizing the latter. By 1990, psychological astrology had become the dominant paradigm among serious practitioners. Though fortune-telling persisted in popular markets, the integration with depth psychology provided theoretical sophistication and practical application that elevated astrology beyond superstition or entertainment. Computer technology had democratized practice while enabling complex techniques impossible in predigital eras. The New Age movement had created a cultural context where astrology could flourish without scientific validation. These developments established frameworks that would carry astrology into the 21st century, no longer as competitor to science, but as complementary symbolic system addressing psychological and spiritual dimensions of human experience that empirical methods could not fully encompass. The final decade of the 20th century brought a technological revolution that would transform astrology more dramatically than any development since the invention of printing. The World Wide Web, launched publicly in 1991, created a global platform where astrological knowledge could be shared instantly across continents, breaking down barriers of geography, language, and tradition that had separated astrological communities for millennia. Within a few years, websites offering free birth charts proliferated, making professional-level horoscope calculation available to anyone with internet access, completing the democratization process that had begun with computer technology. The digital revolution initially seemed to threaten professional astrologers whose livelihood depended on calculating and interpreting charts for clients who lacked technical knowledge. Yet, rather than eliminating professional practice, internet technology expanded astrology's market exponentially. Online consultations via email, chat, and eventually video calls enabled astrologers to serve global clientele from their homes. Specialized astrological software evolved from simple chart calculation to sophisticated interpretation programs that could generate detailed reports, rivaling human astrologers, though lacking the intuitive synthesis that remained exclusively human. Astrology.com, launched in 1995, became one of the early internet's most visited sites, demonstrating astrology's massive online appeal. The site offered personalized horoscopes, compatibility reports, and educational content that introduced millions to astrology beyond newspaper sun sign columns. This digital expansion coincided with the dot-com boom's optimistic futurism. Yet, astrology's ancient wisdom provided comforting continuity amid rapid technological change, suggesting human nature remained constant despite digital transformation. The Y2K phenomenon at the millennium's turn sparked renewed interest in apocalyptic and millennial astrology as people sought cosmic significance in the calendar transition. Astrologers debated whether the age of Aquarius had begun or remained centuries away, while popular media sensationalized predictions of transformation or catastrophe. Though January 2000 passed without the technological collapse or spiritual awakening many predicted, the millennium marker intensified cultural fascination with cycles, transitions, and cosmic timing that benefited astrological practitioners. Online astrological communities flourished in forums, message boards, and email lists where enthusiasts could discuss techniques, share interpretations, and debate theoretical points without geographical constraints. These digital gathering places recreated the intellectual exchange of Renaissance astrological schools while democratizing participation beyond professional circles. Amateur astrologers developed expertise through online study that would have required years of formal training in earlier eras, blurring distinctions between professional and amateur practice. The emergence of astrological blogs in the early 2000s created new platforms for individual astrologers to build followings through regular writing about celestial events and their meanings. Bloggers like Mystic Medusa and Susan Miller developed devoted readerships numbering in millions. Their monthly forecasts and cosmic commentary becoming ritual reading for followers navigating personal and professional challenges. This direct relationship between astrologers and audiences, unmediated by publishers or editors, allowed for more personal, experimental, and diverse astrological voices. September 11, 2001, marked a collective trauma that sent many searching for meaning through astrology, with astrologers retroactively identifying warning signs and planetary alignments while offering hope for healing and transformation. The attacks coincided with Saturn opposing Pluto, a configuration astrologers associated with structural destruction and profound transformation. This pattern of increased astrological consultation during crisis would repeat through subsequent shocks, including the 2008 financial crisis and 2020 pandemic, suggesting astrology's enduring function as meaning-making system during uncertain times. Social media's rise fundamentally altered how astrology spread through culture, with platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and especially Instagram becoming primary venues for astrological content. Memes, replacing lengthy interpretations, made astrological concepts instantly shareable, spreading zodiacal stereotypes and planetary associations through viral humor. The visual nature of Instagram proved particularly suited to astrology's symbolic language, with beautifully designed posts about zodiac signs, planetary transits, and cosmic guidance, attracting millions of followers. The smartphone revolution that began with the iPhone's 2007 launch put sophisticated astrological tools literally in everyone's pocket. Apps like CoStar, The Pattern, and Sanctuary transformed astrology from occasional consultation to daily practice, sending push notifications about planetary transits and personalized insights throughout the day. These apps used artificial intelligence and machine learning to generate interpretations that felt personally relevant, creating intimate relationships between users and algorithmic astrologers. Millennials, born between 1981 and 1996, embraced astrology with enthusiasm that surprised observers who expected digital natives to reject such ancient practices. Growing up with economic uncertainty, climate crisis, and political upheaval, millennials found in astrology a framework for understanding personal and collective challenges that traditional institutions failed to address. Astrology offered language for discussing mental health, relationships, an identity that felt more accessible than clinical psychology's diagnostic categories. The concept of Mercury retrograde entered mainstream consciousness through social media, becoming cultural shorthand for communication breakdowns and technological glitches. These periods when Mercury appears to move backward became widely anticipated events when people expected delays, misunderstandings, and equipment failures. The popularity of Mercury retrograde demonstrated how astrological concepts could provide shared cultural reference points even among those who did not seriously practice astrology. Generation Z, born after 1996, took astrology even further into mainstream culture, treating zodiac signs as essential identity markers alongside gender, sexuality, and cultural background. Dating apps added astrological compatibility features, while TikTok astrologers gained millions of followers through short videos explaining planetary influences with humor and authenticity. This generation's comfort with fluid identities and multiple truth systems made astrology's symbolic language particularly appealing. The COVID-19 pandemic that began in 2020 created conditions for an astrological renaissance as lockdown populations sought understanding and connection through digital means. Astrologers had noted the rare conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in Capricorn as indicating major structural transformation, seeming to predict the pandemic's disruption of established systems. Online astrological consultations surged as people navigated unprecedented uncertainty, while astrology apps reported dramatic user growth. Professional astrology underwent significant changes in the digital age as traditional certification programs competed with online courses and self-taught practitioners who built authority through social media presence rather than formal credentials. The democratization of astrological knowledge challenged established hierarchies while enriching the field with diverse perspectives from practitioners who might have been excluded from traditional training. Questions about quality control and professional standards remained unresolved as the field expanded beyond traditional boundaries. Academic study of astrology increased in the 21st century, though usually from historical, cultural, or sociological perspectives rather than validation of astrological claims. Universities offered courses on astrology's cultural impact, while historians recognize its central role in pre-modern thought. This scholarly attention, while not endorsing astrology's validity, acknowledged its significance as a persistent cultural phenomenon, deserving serious study rather than dismissive rejection. The integration of diverse astrological traditions accelerated through digital connection as Western astrologers discovered Vedic, Chinese, and Hellenistic techniques previously accessible only through specialized study. Online translation tools and international communities enabled unprecedented cross-cultural exchange, creating hybrid practices that combined different systems, strengths. This synthesis challenged cultural appropriation concerns while enriching astrological practice with global perspectives. Artificial intelligence began transforming astrological practice as machine learning algorithms analyzed vast databases of charts and interpretations to generate increasingly sophisticated readings. While some celebrated AI's potential to democratize expert-level interpretation, others worried about losing astrology's intuitive human dimension. The question of whether algorithms could replicate the synthesis and wisdom of experienced astrologers remained contentious as technology advanced. Celebrity astrology became a distinct genre as fans analyzed famous figures' birth charts to understand their personalities, relationships, and career trajectories. Astrologers gained followings by predicting celebrity breakups, analyzing compatibility between famous couples, and explaining public figures' behavior through planetary influences. This parasocial astrology demonstrated how celestial interpretation provided framework for understanding distant figures who seemed simultaneously relatable and mysterious. The wellness industry's explosive growth in the 2010s incorporated astrology alongside yoga, meditation, and alternative healing practices. Luxury astrology retreats, birth chart jewelry, and zodiac-themed self-care products transformed astrology into a lifestyle brand marketed to affluent consumers seeking meaning beyond material success. This commercialization raised questions about astrology's authenticity, while enabling practitioners to build sustainable careers in competitive markets. Climate change and environmental crisis influenced contemporary astrology as practitioners incorporated ecological awareness into celestial interpretation. The concept of Earth as living system resonated with astrological worldviews that saw cosmic interconnection rather than mechanical separation. Some astrologers developed eco-astrology focused on humanity's relationship with natural cycles, while others used celestial timing to support environmental activism. Political astrology experienced revival as practitioners analyzed national charts, predicted election outcomes, and offered cosmic context for social movements. The United States Pluto return in 2022, marking the planet's first complete orbit since American independence, became framework for understanding political upheaval and potential transformation. While critics dismissed political astrology as confirmation bias, its popularity suggested widespread desire for cosmic perspective on earthly power struggles. Current debates within astrology focus on decolonization, inclusivity, and ethical practice as younger astrologers challenge traditional interpretations rooted in patriarchal, heteronormative, or culturally specific assumptions. Queer astrology reinterpreted gender associations of planets and signs, while BIPOC astrologers reclaimed non-Western traditions and challenged Eurocentric dominance. These conversations paralleled broader cultural reckonings while demonstrating astrology's capacity for evolution and self-reflection. As astrology approaches its sixth millennium of recorded practice, its persistence, despite scientific revolution, religious opposition, cultural transformation, suggests something essential. It provides that neither empirical science nor orthodox religion fully addresses the human need to find personal meaning in cosmic pattern, to feel connected to rhythms greater than individual existence, to have language for discussing fate and freedom, personality and potential, continues to find expression through celestial symbolism. The digital age has not diminished astrology, but amplified it, spreading ancient wisdom through fiber optic cables and satellite signals, creating global community around shared celestial experience. Whether astrology represents literal truth, psychological projection, cultural tradition, or entertaining diversion, matters less than its demonstrated capacity to help humans navigate existence's mysteries. As long as people seek meaning beyond material reality, as long as we wonder about our place in the cosmos, as long as we look up at night skies with awe and curiosity, astrology will continue evolving to serve humanity's eternal quest to understand ourselves through the stars that have watched our entire history unfold below their ancient light.